Welcome, greatest audience on the planet, once again to On Eagle's Wings. Great show for you tonight. A very special friend and guest will be joining us tonight. Special thanks to Amanda, otherwise known as the guardian angel for the show, who does all the hard work making it possible to get these shows put together, packaged, and sent out. So, my eternal thanks to GA for all her good work and good works that she does. In some recent times, during the Iran operations, we had a major combat SAR, combat strike rescue operation to recover the weapon system operator from a Strike Eagle. It was in the news. It cost us a lot of aircraft. Thankfully, no one was killed in the process of making a very successful rescue and recovery out of that mission. But once again, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, specifically helicopters, were a key part of that operation to affect the actual pickup and rescue. Part of what we're going to be talking about tonight is an advancement in the area of vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, that you'll hear often tonight, as well as major impacts and what I consider some of the more important aspects of where we're going as a country and our particular continent, and probably eventually worldwide, how we move through the air. Now, at some point, and you'll hear me talk about this, we've talked about it in the past. There's other talked about technology out there that might make the actual manipulation of air molecules to make lift and thrust obsolete. But until that is publicly known, if it does exist or it's practical, we're still working with the same capabilities that we had. And my guest tonight, Peter Schmidt, is a founder, CEO of a company that, as far as I'm concerned, has come up with one of the best, if not the best solution for a very important part of our aviation and transportation needs that are up ahead. So I hope you'll enjoy talking with him. He is a phenomenal person, and I really enjoy being around him and his team the few times that I've had a chance to meet them. So, with that said, greatest audience on the planet, as always, God's peace that surpasses all knowledge and understanding. Let's start on Eagle's Wings and transcend it. Well, Mr. Peter Schmidt, welcome to On Eagle's Wings and the greatest audience on the planet that follows this show. Thank you so much for taking some very valuable time out of your very busy schedule to join us.
Cobra, it's an honor to be here with the greatest audience in the world, and looking forward to talking about the really cool VTOL stuff we're working on.
So, we're not going to spend a lot of time kind of getting all the good to know and half the fun stuff. I think the most important thing that I want to start this out with is I am a student of all kinds of aviation stuff, obviously military history. The vast majority of my adult life and adolescent time was spent around aircraft and airplanes and helicopters. But I was preparing for this show and I did some looking back, and Da Vinci had some pretty interesting things that he said about flight. And he talked about that you're going to have wing flapping, but in that wing flapping, he was really talking about control of angle of attack. You know, he was already talking about thrust, he was talking about lift and making that work. And then he started to talk about control mechanisms, things that you needed to actually be able to affect the control on that. And of course, he developed and had sketched out the aerial screw, but he did not have a power plant to make that work for his vertical flight capability. And he was also one that was a very big advocate of the parachute. And what made me think about all that was almost all those things are encompassed in this in this incredible project and company and team that you lead. Da Vinci kind of held concepts all being melded into, and we'll talk about hopefully all of them tonight in this aspect. So as I am so apt to say, thank you again for taking the time. I'll probably call upon you again in the future because I think the reaction will be very, very strong to the show, and maybe we'll do a more specific dive down one of the many, many topics we're going to try to cover. And I look forward to trying to do it again with you. But I think, in your own words, the only way you can start this journey is with that first step, and that first step is, how did Transcend Air? How did this team? How did this concept? What drove you guys to get this thing to go? And
There's
guess.
a lot of places to start that story. And unlike you, I was never a military aviator. I wanted to be. I fell in love with aviation when I was 3 years old. My dad took me to an open house, and I saw a two flight of Delta darts climbing like homesick angels. And that's when I got the bug. Another thing Da Vinci said is, once you've tasted flight, you can never look at the world the same way.
Right.
And that was true. I became one of those people who looks up every time an aircraft flies overhead. But in sixth grade, I got glasses. My eyes are so bad, the military wouldn't let me look at an aircraft. So I took another path. But eventually I got my pilot's license, and I immediately became an aerobatic pilot. So I fly upside down and sideways for fun. The first thirds of my career as an entrepreneur were in high tech, software, networking, embedded systems, like the kind of computers we put on aircraft. And that got boring. And I got a fortuitous phone call from a guy named Bill Herp, who had started a Part 135 charter operator with the aspiration of offering service on very light jets, and specifically the Eclipse 500 very light jet. And if people were around for the early to mid 2000s, there was a big splash about how we're going to fill the sky with aluminum for these little cool jets that would be sitting, waiting, ready to go anytime you walked up to an airport. Yeah, that didn't happen. But we didn't know it. I joined back in the end of 2010. So I switched career paths to aviation, 16 years ago now. At the same time, a friend of mine who I knew through the networking world, a guy named Greg Brule, had also gotten the bug. But in his case, it was specifically for VTOL. He grew up on the eastern end of Long Island, and between the Long Island Expressway and trying to get up to Connecticut to visit his grandmother and then get up to Boston where he lived, he just, like a lot of us, fantasized about flying up out of traffic and not having to deal with the mess.
Sure.
So I learned at Linear Air, Bill Herp's company operating the Eclipse jets, how people buy air travel. And that's the whole episode by itself. But let me say that there's a bunch of standard common sense notions that turn out to be false. And I spent 5 years proving them false.
Right.
And meanwhile, Greg had partnered with an inventor, and they built a 2,000-pound manned prototype VTOL aircraft and got it into flight test. And I joined them at the end of that flight test program. And our goal was to offer what is now called regional air mobility. So cheaper, faster, better air travel. And the aircraft design we picked to do that with is the tilt wing. Now, people, especially on this program, are familiar with the tilt rotor. The V-22 Osprey is the only operational one to date. Why did we pick the tilt wing? Well, we had looked at a whole bunch, really surveyed the entire history. Like this one. This is the first tilt wing that flew successfully. This is the Vertol at the time, now Boeing Vertol, VZ2. This was presented to me by Fred Piasecki, one of the sons of Frank Piasecki, who was one of the pioneers of rotor wing helicopter aviation. And they came up with the idea of tilting the wing. Well, I'm not sure they invented it. It was a vehicle architecture a lot of people were experimenting with, but they were the first to fly it successfully. If you know about airplanes, when you tilt the wing up beyond the critical angle of attack, it stalls. So flying out the wing, the angle that's on that picture, it's a real trick. And in fact, a couple different tricks you can use to make it work. And we had a hypothesis that we could perfect the tilt wings by using the advances in technology of the past 70 years, meaning higher power to weight aircraft engines. Yeah, so here we go. Back in the 1960s, the Air Force built 5 XC-142s. Those flew over 400 knots in the 1960s. Canadair built the CL-84, which looks a lot like an upsized VZ2. It also flew successfully and had great trials. At the same
Both
time,
very, very famous aircraft and both very successful programs,
yeah,
but they were not practical, I think is what they tried to come out and say. I think the CL-54 just had poor handling, poor hand. They weren't marketed well.
There's a couple different aspects to it in retrospect. Like I went back and read all of the flight test reports and looked at what the deficiencies were. And the major deficiency for the CL-84 was a problem with flying a normal approach to landing at an airport, like a 5-degree descent path angle while you were transitioning. And you just shouldn't do that.
Right.
It's just, right. That exacerbates the stall angle, the critical angle of attack on the wing. The right way to do it is to fly in at pattern altitude over the numbers, transition level, and then come down quickly.
Right.
They didn't think of that.
Right.
They didn't think of that.
And I'm going to throw something in, Pete, real quick. There's also another aspect that's going on in the background, not when these programs were going on directly, but the Air Force and the Army were fighting over who was going to have dominance in aviation, especially in the rotary world. The Army wasn't allowed to have airplanes, and they had some very fine short takeoff and landing airplanes, the C-7 Caribou being one of them. They did a lot of work with that, and then they were taken away from them and given to the Air Force. And the Air Force basically kind of gave up on rotor wing flight as a primary area. So the Army got very, very small observation type airplanes, O-1 Bird Dogs, and then, of course, the helicopters. And they had this thing called the Key West Accords. And I think in the case of the XC-142, it started to really cause problems in the transport world because that wasn't designed to do anything but have a very short takeoff and landing capability. What we kind of see now going on with the F-35B, it'll land vertically, it'll take off horizontally, more traditionally as an airplane, or if you do take it off vertically, you just can't carry a very big load with it. It's not practical. So then they use a runway or the jump jet ramp kind of capabilities. But in the background, I think anytime anything started to look like it was going to impinge upon large programs that the Air Force was running, it started to get squashed. Because I think that the 142 had some great promise.
It did.
As a capability, especially when you think about, we landed C-130s on aircraft carriers. We tried that out years later just to prove it worked. And if we had gone further with the 142, that would have been the perfect airframe to do that kind of work.
It was really a good aircraft. It passed all its flight tests. It was the first program that Burt Rutan worked on after he graduated from college.
Right. And I fly one of his legacies proudly in the canard world.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that connection. The 142, the other thing that was going on was this war called Vietnam. And Bell was shipping Hueys faster than we could believe, right? So at the same time that the Air Force and the guys in Canada and the Germans were exploring tilt wings with a lot of success, we had tilt rotor experimentation here. And the main company behind tilt rotor experimentation, of course, was Bell.
Right.
So there was a political aspect to it as well. I like to think of it as like the Android versus Apple of the 1960s. And ultimately, tilt rotor won that round of the fight.
But we won't upset any of the audience and say which one represents Android and which one represents Apple. We'll just let everyone conclude that they have the winning product in their hands.
Yes, of course. Exactly.
Because I never know who my future sponsors are. We don't want to send anybody away.
We'll try not to. So we looked at the tilt wing. And the thing about the tilt wing is if you need to go faster than a helicopter and not as fast as an F-35, in other words, not supersonic, and you need VTOL, tilt wing turns out to be the most efficient vehicle architecture.
Right.
And that's a tilt wing with modern enhancements in carbon fiber and engines and, critically, computerized flight controls, fly-by-wire. And we had a hypothesis that would be true after doing extensive analysis starting back in 2016. And it's proved out over the past decade. So Transcend has basically been an R&D organization for the past 10 years, proving that out.
Let me just make a quick aerodynamic side stop here.
Yeah.
When we talk about rotors, and on the V-22, they use a prop rotor.
Yep.
When we talk about a helicopter, we're using a rotor, a main rotor assembly of some kind. Some have them, two in tandem. That's the Piasecki input to it, which allows for high-speed flight or higher speed flight. And then, of course, you have your more traditional. And, of course, now we have some that have two rotors on there. But one of the problems there, you're creating lift. You're creating lift in a fashion that lifts your vehicle up underneath it. And it does maximize in the vertical plane. But when you go to translation to forward airspeed, you have a bunch of problems that come up. And that's why we'll see a picture later on of one of the vehicles I flew, that they try to come up with ways to compensate that. When you go to a tilt rotor, tilt wing, the tilt wing is still using a lift type of technology in a propeller, but the propeller is optimized for thrust. It's the same kind of thing that we're doing with an F-35, what we did with the Harrier. It's a thrust management situation that you're positioning yourself in, and the propeller is very, very efficient in producing that thrust, as well as that when you go to forward flight. So when you see pictures like the one that's behind me is a rendition of one of the Transcend air vehicles. You see those propellers. They look like the fairly standard turboprops that you would find on most of the aircraft that are flying out today. And that rotor, and I'll switch the picture over after the break. You'll see it when it's sitting in a horizontal mode. My point to that is, when you look at something like a V-22 with its much bigger prop rotors, the combination of rotor blade and propeller, you have a much larger disc that you are trying to put through the air. So the efficiencies are found in a number of places. But I always try to make people understand this is a thrust vectoring aircraft in a much higher sense than a lifting aircraft in the vertical plane. And that's one of the really important efficiencies.
Absolutely. And it was one of the hypotheses we had, is that there was a way to master that creation and blending of thrust off the propellers and using it for lift in vertical flight, using it for thrust in forward flight, and blending the two as you tilt the wing up and down. And we were right, but it was not trivial to figure out how to do that.
Right. And there's really there's no other source to go to. You, Transcend, and you and your teams had to come up with all the technology, all the simulation, and then all the hard work, the math part of it that made these things actually work the way they're supposed to work and be provable. We do live in an age now that you can program simulators to do a lot of very accurate test flight. I mean, the B-21 program, the Raider, is a perfect example of how they've meshed your engineering, your design engineering into the production of the aircraft, so as they're actually making physical measurements, they're putting that data in, and they're actually flying the aircraft before the aircraft first flies. You folks have been doing the same kind of thing from the start, and at almost, but in small areas, and then in total encapsulation of the entire aircraft.
That's correct, and it helps that my co-founder Greg and I are both software guys. So that was our bias for how you would do this from the beginning. It also helped that we won several Air Force contracts, and a couple of them paid us to make that simulator more faithful.
Right.
We actually used it to demonstrate nap of the Earth flight with that aircraft behind you in military colors. And one of the cool things about an airplane versus a helicopter is an airplane can push negative Gs that a helicopter can't.
Right.
The way helicopters hanging from the rotor system work is if you push negative Gs, the rotor blades slap down and cut the helicopter up, which is, a bad day. So, but airplanes,
in general.
Yeah. So nap of the Earth flight, flying very close to the terrain, which you do to stay out of harm's and missiles' way, helicopters are, challenged when they have to do that. They either have to slow down to go down, or they have to accept blooming up over ridges, or do other, kinds of sideways maneuvering, which takes them off course. And so one of the advantages of our tilt wing VTOL vehicle architecture is exactly that you can maintain close terrain separation. We demonstrated for the Air Force in the simulator 60-foot terrain obstacle separation, 360 knots through the mountains northeast of Kabul. In
So
a
what you're
simulated,
doing then is you're following the same kind of pathways that terrain following F-111s did, slightly different system. We did have a helicopter in the Air Force called the Pavlo, the 53 modified one that did that as well, with a huge, I'm not going to say penalty, but it did cost weight, which meant
Yep.
either range or cargo or both for that capability, but never able to approach those speeds. So you've created an aircraft that emulates what jets do.
yes,
Which, in my opinion, since I've had the opportunity to do both, this with a much higher degree of control and a much greater, what I project is going to be a responsiveness that if you decide you're going to slam this thing to a very, very quick stop, you're going to be able to do that, where you don't do that in a traditional airplane type aircraft, a jet type aircraft. And you're
yeah,
going to immediately be able to accelerate when a helicopter cannot accelerate as fast as this will.
yeah, very true. And it's another thing that I really enjoy about this vehicle, being kind of a muscle car guy. I
Right.
mean, I appreciate sports cars, but my heart is like a muscle car guy.
But a muscle
And
car that handles like a sports car, now we're
yes,
that's really what you're after, and I had a Mercedes when I was stationed in Germany. I could beat everybody off the block, everybody, including a Porsche, because it had a double carburetor. This thing was designed to get on the Autobahn. Past
yeah,
60, 65 miles an hour, that second carburetor would close up and it would, go back. And it handled, because Mercedes just put all that engineering to make this really large sedan
yeah.
handle like the sports cars that I had. It was crazy.
I know. I had a Dodge Magnum SRT 8 with a Hemi, and it had a lot of German engineering in it because it came from the era where they had strong partnerships with Mercedes.
Right.
So yeah, I had the same experience. And that's what these tilt wings are too. You can, unlike a jet, you've got propellers, you've got rapid acceleration and deceleration. And with the wing, we can do some really impressive, not just thrust vectoring, but we're also vectoring lift and drag.
Right. Which is
And
important. And again, I'm really geeking out here, and I need to let you kind of get more into explaining the air mobility portion of it. There are abilities that have in this configuration that don't require other aerodynamic devices that we have on other airplanes.
yes,
Things like speed brakes, things like maneuvering flaps, other added on things. You don't have to slat these airplanes. And for the folks that aren't as geeky as your host is on this, we're making the wing more simple, more pure in its shape and form. That pays all kinds of benefits: reduced weight, reduced mechanical failures, servicing becomes less of an issue. That's the important things that you're looking for. So you're getting down to real, rocks and chains and hammers kind of thing, that you have your specific areas that you're able to really very quickly maximize your capability. And of course, from a guy who spent most of his time below 12,000 feet and below, the performance what this does, mash and air, is very, very impressive.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because that again was a key reason why we bet on the tilt wing platform originally, was that we felt we could do that. In fact, one of the videos we could run is I think it's called Vi Like the CL-84. So I took a simulated version of the aircraft behind you, and I replicated this classic promotional film that Canada Air made. And what it'll show is how much mechanically simpler we can do the same job without extra structures and things. So
well,
I don't know if we can pull that up.
Hopefully the guardian angel here is able to pull it up. Say it one more time so we can bring it up.
It should. I believe it's called Vi Like the CL
sideways and backwards is a measure of its ability to perform hover turns in a wind while remaining on station and handle crosswinds during takeoffs, transitions, and landings. 0 to 100 knots takes about 8 seconds. The flying demonstration concludes with an inbound transition to a hover landing. The relative movement of the horizontal stabilizer with the tilting wing is clearly seen.
Look at how the tail tilts in the CL-84. We don't need to do that. That's extra weight and complexity we don't need.
A small reduction of power is required to complete the landing as the aircraft enters ground effect.
Amanda made a remark that she loved the tune that you played with that. I was getting a feeling of back to the original Star Wars when they walked into the bar. It almost had that kind of
The
that kind of
cantina.
a feel to
Yeah.
it. All right.
Yeah.
So at the end of that very beautifully done clip, you had New York, San Francisco, and I think Los Angeles were some of the cities that were the scapes at the very
Yeah.
end there. Let's get back to the real root of how this started. I mean, the military part of it is where I obviously want to hang, but you can't talk about that if we don't talk about the regional mobility aspect of this. And I will say this: I didn't put it in the beginning. I talked about the combat SAR operations that we had with the Iranian operations. But anybody here who hears our voice, who's been on an airline flight recently, will understand why this is so important for our nation, for money, for if you want to talk about getting out of the debt. I'm not exaggerating here. This type of aircraft, this type of system will take a big dent out of that. I'm also talking about if you don't want to have the verge of a nervous breakdown or a mental anguish every time you try to get into an airline situation because of what we've done. And I'm going to cue it up with the airlines are trying to do what you can do with this airplane with inappropriate aircraft.
Yeah.
Running jets and only out of one type of air facility is what's killing us. So now that I've queued it up, please take it from there.
Yeah, exactly. I learned how people actually buy air travel. And I also learned about the economics of what makes sustainably profitable air travel. And it's fundamental. You just have to fill enough seats every day to cover your overhead and generate a profit. There are a couple ways to do that. You can have bigger aircraft or you can have faster aircraft. And you have to be operating from places where there's enough demand to go from point A to point B to fill those aircraft.
Right.
So that's where VTOL came in. The centers of cities, there's no more travel demand than in the middle of a city. That's where the population density is highest. Those Eclipse Very Light jets, they did not fill the skies with aluminum because there aren't very many people out near reliever airports in the boonies. So you could never fill the seats. So nobody could make money with them. So that whole bubble burst. So I have another video that I think will make this clear.
But let me just ask you one question before we roll into that video.
Yeah.
Why don't you just have helicopters be the feeders? Oh, is that coming up in the video? Am I getting ahead of myself?
Let's play the video but that's a great question. Play the video first and then we'll answer it. So, not this one, although this is important. It's the New York to Boston video we want to play next. So cheaper, faster, and better. That's the goal. That's how you revolutionize something, in this case, regional air travel. So that $283 one way is less than an Uber to LaGuardia, the Delta shuttle, and an Uber from Logan to downtown Boston. So that's the cheaper part. The faster is...
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
The faster is 32 minutes in the air. So if you work nearby and you're going to a meeting downtown, that's about an hour door to door. There's no way to do Boston to New York in under 4.5 hours at this point, because all the different ways you can go are congested.
So let's talk about that helicopter option. I'm just going to take a helicopter from Boston down to New York.
Yeah. So I had to do the modeling to teach myself the answer. And by modeling, I mean spreadsheet modeling.
Right.
Now, I ran a small airline. So I had a model of a small airline. We offered scheduled service between New York and Boston on Cirrus SR-22 piston aircraft. So I expanded that and built the model. So I can tell you that the reason you can't do it with helicopters is you can't do enough round trips per day to get enough passenger seat miles per day to be profitable at a ticket price under about $800 per seat. And nobody's going to pay that.
Correct.
It's not competitive. So that's why you can't do it with helicopters. They're too slow.
And the cost per hour to fly them is not efficient on those kind of long distances, especially when you're trying to rotate them back and forth.
Yeah, no, it's true, because the maintenance costs kill you. That isn't even talking about the increased direct operating cost from increased maintenance that would happen if you tried to run that with helicopters. But with helicopters, you can do only about maybe 2 round trips per day within a service window that people would want to fly in.
Right.
And so you can't do it. With that aircraft that was in that video, we started out going, we can definitely do 4 round trips per day. And then we figured out we could get it up to 5. And then our latest variant that we tend to commercialize, we can actually do 6 round trips per day between Boston and New York.
Now, that's particular example you just put there, Peter, is important because it doesn't require that you go to an airport.
Yes.
And that's not something I want to gloss over. That's really an important feature on this. Now, in the case of the rendition that you showed us, they're using established heliports that are there. So you have an aircraft that's very compatible to go to a heliport. And I'm not saying that helicopters don't have a place in the future in this. They don't. You could easily be using this aircraft to link up to helicopter or some other kinds of transportation, ground transportation like that. But the important part is we're not taking that intermediate ride from an airport facility and all the other things that go on with that, because that's not an efficient model. And the problem is, to make money and to make profit, we've jammed in a whole bunch of other things into our airport system, as well as we can't take full advantage in the airspace of being able to fly point to point, because point to point has to start and end at an airport. If point to point is a parking lot or is a facility like an industrial center that has a heliport on it, you have the ability, just like I do when I leave an uncontrolled airfield in an airplane, in a very small airplane, I can enter the system and I go fly direct to where I want to go next. Now, I can't make these kinds of speeds because I don't have the kind of money to buy an airplane to go do that. But that's the kind of airplane that people would have needed, cost-wise, when you were trying to do it with the jet that you just couldn't achieve. Yeah. But now you're able to put point-to-point capabilities with a very fast-moving, efficient aircraft.
And one that is certified to fly in icing, will be fully IFR, can mix with the airliners without slowing them down. So it'll jump right into the real air transport system and play a role.
Exploit some of the holes that still exist that make it beneficial, as opposed to not adding to the pressure of the system. You're actually diffusing some of the system.
Exactly.
Right. Before we jump into our next piece, we're really at our break here. So let's take our break. We'll join back in a second. My guest tonight, Peter Schmidt, is the CEO of Transcend Air. A revolutionary jump, not an evolutionary step, a revolutionary jump in air transport. We've talked and we've kind of laid out the economic case, the civilian case, and now I'm going to start pushing a little bit more into the military case. and see what I can pull out. Greatest audience on the planet, hang tough. We'll be back with you on the other side on Eagles Wings. Welcome back to On Eagles Wings. My guest, Peter Schmidt, CEO, founder of Transcend Air, a tilt wing aircraft that is a revolutionary design. Now, Peter, we were talking about the economic case in the civil world, what we would not give. And I could go on endlessly. I mean, I could talk another couple hours on the civil side of this. Where I live in New England, not too far from where you live in Massachusetts, we have vast expanses that still don't have road access. And we, helicopter med flights are very, very critical part of the care system that's on there. But again, you're still talking speeds that are going to generally stay below between 150 miles per hour to maybe 200 miles per hour if you're really, really lucky and you really want to tear up your helicopter. And I know this probably better than most people because I spent a lot of time in high-speed research for helicopters. So with that said, the ability now to move that around is there. The ability to do it for just standard commerce as well as passenger movement, cargo movement, medevac, all that's there. You have a lot of the same features, and I contend, and this is something we're going to start moving towards, that this is a platform that's acceptable for doing direct kind of work that I did in the Coast Guard, where you're hoisting people from boats or the water or from the woods or from hilltops, especially when you get into higher terrain. I think it's higher there. So let's talk about, well, why didn't the civilian world come knocking on the door and lay the money down and make it happen? How come you didn't get the .com experience that went on there?
We didn't want to use batteries for power because batteries can't let you go fast enough, far enough to have an economic aircraft. And I say this as the chair of the E-VTOL Flight Test Council,
right,
which my buddy Al founded 6 years ago, and I jumped in. So yeah, batteries just don't have energy density, 1/40th the energy per pound of jet fuel. So we had to eliminate that as a choice. And 10 years ago, there was a huge boom in funding for battery-powered aircraft.
Right.
And there's lots of sociological, economic reasons why that happened. Sure. And hype, a lot of hype went into that. Yeah. But we were never interested. You can't solve the problem we want to solve with it. So meanwhile, we were working on high-speed vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And the Air Force came along with something called the High-Speed VTOL Challenge. They were looking for vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that could go over 400 knots. And that makes them about 200 knots faster than the V-22 Osprey. So going over 400 knots means approaching 500 miles an hour. So we're talking about almost 3 times as fast as a helicopter can go. Right. And we were invited to the party. I was one of 100 people from across industry, academia, and the military that was invited to brainstorm at the kickoff meeting for high-speed VTOL. And to pick up on something you said in your intro, I'm responsible for keeping a key technology on the Air Force's list of key technologies for high-speed VTOL, which is anti-gravity. There's a long story behind how I became responsible for doing that, but I did because it is true that as long as we have to move air in order to take off and land vertically, the best we're going to be able to do at high speed is the tilt wing sitting behind you, that kind of vehicle. If we want to do better, if I want to walk out my front door, float up into the sky, and silently sail off to where I want to go, which is ultimately what everybody wants to do, right, you're going to need anti-gravity for that. It's the only way.
Well, now that we've set up the premise for the second show,
yes,
the next installment,
I look forward to talking about it.
I do too.
So there I was, the High-Speed VTOL Challenge, and I've got a slide on this because I'm very proud about this. So this turned into a contracting opportunity, and we proposed our aircraft. So If that slide appears, that's great. But basically, we had to take our design and militarize it. And we had to learn, because we were coming at this. I mean, I've been a military aviation fan since I was 3, as I established. But there's a slide with HS VTOL in the title that if we can pull that up, that would be a good thing. There we go. So Transcend Air Corporation came out on top after 3 down selects, right? That's a bunch of military jargon. But what that means is you can see back in the beginning of it, I was one of about 100 participants in the brainstorming. And then they asked for proposals for 400 plus knot high-speed VTOL aircraft designs. And 218 companies and inventors proposed. We were one of 32 that passed the first hurdle. And then we went through another round of refinement. And we were then one of 8 that made it through the second hurdle. And then there's a whole nother round, and we came out in the top of the top 5. Now, why do I say we were on top? It's because I know the other 4 designs in that, and I can explain at length the technical advantages of our design. But what it comes down to is, again, cheaper, faster, better. Right? Bell was one of the competitors in that top 5, and I think they were shocked that we could be real competition to them. And it goes back to that original propeller versus rotor discussion we had.
Right.
Our design not only has propellers, which are much simpler than prop rotors. Bell's design proposes taking the prop rotors in the V-22, already much more complex, and making them more complicated yet. And so our argument has always been that the trade, where their aircraft design arguably could go maybe 50 knots faster than ours at the top end. But ours is going to be so much less expensive to maintain and sustain in the military.
Right.
That's why I will argue that we came out on top in all those designs.
I mean, there's a lot of things I can throw in there. Folks looking at the picture behind me, this is the rendition of what a sample aircraft would look like. The wing is sitting on the ground. The wing is straight up. This is how it would look if it was in hovering flight. I just take a quick look at each propeller that's on the hub there. If that is a prop rotor, you're going to have other flapping mechanisms, and what that means is that each pedal of the rotor has to be able to move. So that's an important feature that's not needed on a propeller because of its shorter size. So you have a much more efficient, and you have less hardware at that engine and at that rotor hub where you're transmitting your power to rotate the propellers. So what that means is, from someone who's operated airplanes and helicopters for close to 40 years now, you have a lot of maintenance that comes out on that, and you have more areas for it to become a problem, as well as you have a larger physical area. And as we spoke on the drag, I'm taking nothing away from the Bell products. I'm very happy that the Valor is the aircraft that was selected to be the next replacement for the Army, and moving them into VTOL aircraft. Why? Because although I have no more children that are going to be in the military, I'm tired of people flying around the battlefield out over the water in the battle space at a maximum of 90 to 120 knots, or about 110 to about 150 miles per hour in a traditional helicopter. Please don't bring me your brochures and tell me how fast it can go, because even if you're driving a British Lynx, or now I think that's Leonardo Lynx, if you're driving one of them and you're absolutely bending it up at top end speed, you're beating the hell out of that airframe to do it. It's capable of doing it, and it has a rigid rotor system, so it eliminates some of the things I'm talking about. My point is, I don't want our forces running around anymore at the same speed that we fought in Korea. And that's really where we're at. Perfected in Vietnam, but we haven't made advance. And we've had opportunities. Another show we can go on, and all the opportunities that we absolutely squandered. There's the nice word. I don't have to get the FCC involved in it. We squandered opportunities on that because of a bunch of reasons that I won't go into, but the politics and the foolishness that goes on is behind it. Everyone says they want to talk about the science, then let's talk about the science. Let's talk about the economic science. Let's talk about the mechanical science, and talk about the aeroscience on this. And that's why I'm such a big fan of what you and Transcend Air Corp, TAC has done, because you have really done the homework. And that's another thing we're not doing. We're not doing the homework. And I think it's because it's the approach of software guys and gals, as opposed to just pure. Where I work, I'm on an engineering team, and I have project managers, and the really good project managers know that when the engineers get their backside up, the fur's going up about something, they'll pull in a logistics guy. So the logistics people can hear what's going on. We need this, and it's got to do this. And then they'll come back and go, yeah, it's possible, and it'll cost this, or no, there's that's unobtainium. That stuff doesn't exist. You're going to have to go out and engineer that. You have done all that, and you've led that in an interesting way that is, well, that last slide bears it out. You don't, a no-name small company doesn't take on the big ones and have standing at the end of those kind of crucial reviews without it. Well, now you're fighting inertia. Now you're fighting it.
Yeah.
So I think we should probably name one of the aircraft David, because I'm pretty sure you're going to slew Goliath at some point on this. And I like the biblical reference, as everyone knows with me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I am 100% in agreement with everything you just said. You know, well, I know you were on the X-49, right? So you were one of the test pilots, weren't you?
Yes, I was. And you mentioned the Piasekis, wonderful people, wonderful family. Frank Sr., the founder of Piasecki, he took a flight in an autogyro, and he was a photographer in those days, and he was really intrigued with flight. And he knew right off the bat that helicopters were inefficient. And his first design, he tried not to have a tail rotor. That was one of the things that slowed the helicopter down. And the power sources didn't allow for them to do a vectored thrust capability. But right from the start, that's why he came up with the tandem rotor, sold that off to Boeing VTOL. Well, VTOL before it became Boeing VTOL. And then he worked on the X-49. He was a very, very kind man to me. I was a young, I think I was started as a first lieutenant captain in the Air Force in those days before I transitioned to Coast Guard, working on my master's. And I decided to do my senior or my graduation project on compound helicopters. Hand wrote him a letter based on something I found in Jane's, because there was no internet, kids. There was libraries. That was it. And phone books. And you found stuff out, and I got their mailing address. And then many years later, I actually bought a Coast Guard airplane to him. And then years later after that, they contacted me to join their test team. So Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, there's a picture with that helicopter, and it also, there's the X-49. So this is a Navy Seahawk, very good aircraft. Of course, he built a very good helicopter on it. Take a look at that rotor head. You can see all the things I was talking about, all the mechanical stuff that's there. We took off the tail rotor, and we put a pusher propeller in the back of it. And to offset and to make more lift, we put airplane wings on it. This aircraft could go over 200 knots. It could go about 3 times the range for the same amount of fuel in it. And the reason I like to bring this up and show that is that's about as good as you're going to get.
Yep.
You can get maybe sustained. And then one of the things that Piasecki did with this aircraft that was absolutely amazing is they brought in a specialist who brought down all the vibrations. He did this on race cars. He did this on all kinds of machines, helicopters in general. But he came in and he found ways to reduce the imbalance which caused vibrations. And one of the things they were able to present was, if they were trying to convince the Army to do, if you could in 5 years convert all your Blackhawks, all your 860s to this configuration, and you would reduce the vibrations by a third, which meant you would extend the life of components and your maintenance interval to change them out, because helicopters beat themselves. You don't have that kind of consideration in an airplane. One more quick thing, Amanda, if you would bring that picture back up real quick. One of the things that the tilt rotor that I learned to respect on this was the tilt wing is a very big advantage to over a tilt rotor and over a helicopter that is augmented this way, is that when you get into a hover air coming down from those rotors is hitting the top side of the wing. So one of the ways we had planned, and this is just a demonstrator, wasn't the final configuration. Unfortunately, it never got built in a final config, is that we were going to raise those wings, put them further back, and we were going to sweep them forward so that the downward flow of the air from the rotors would not be impacting on top of the wings, because that's an inefficiency and you have to overcome that. So if you put the wings further back, there would be less of it that would hit. So when I first saw Peter's rendition of this, when I was reading something in a technical release, I was immediately drawn to the fact that it was the much more efficient way. We don't have heavy engines out on the ends of the wings. We have a propeller hub assembly out on the wings. And when you got into vertical flight, you were not fighting that because it flips up. It's basically in that up design. So now I'll let my guest talk, who you really want to hear talk about this, but he did fan my my ego by talking about the X-49.
No, I love the X-49. It's a compound helicopter in two ways, right? It has compound propulsion with that pusher propeller in the back, right?
Right.
And it's making lift both with the rotary wing, the rotor blades, and the fixed wings on it.
Right.
And it really is as good as you're going to make a helicopter. Sikorsky recently tried to make a compound rotor helicopter where they had two coaxial rotors. And the vibrations in that were so bad, two separate test pilots suffered detached retinas.
Right.
That's how bad vibrations were. Right. So,
and to Sikorsky's credit, Lockheed's credit, they did get a lot of that work down. One of my questions I've always had with that, though, is how does it auto-rotate? Does it auto-rotate well when you have two counter-rotating systems like that? Because you have an energy level that's changed. And again, it's a very uncomfortable question to bring up about the V-22. What can you do in a V-22? And I lost a friend in the V-22 testing program. They got, because of delays that were going on, they got to a point, going back to Pax River, they got to very low fuel. And when they rotated the engines up to land, it flamed out the engines because it didn't have a reserve retention around it. So when it rotated up at very low fuel, it was at a state where it couldn't draw any more fuel up to the engines.
Oops.
So, and you cannot land it as an airplane. You have to land it in a prop rotor up condition to go in. So you can, you have a certain amount of glide that you can, but he had no drive on the system. And again, this is why you test fly these, you find these kinds of things out, sometimes the hard way, not the easy way when you're able to simulate it out. So again, this is another feature that you guys present. I brought that up when I talked about the Da Vinci piece. Yep. What if all goes wrong here? What's the concept that TAC Air has for making a recovery?
Whole airframe parachute.
And we don't have that in any other air. Oh, yes, we do.
No, it's a proven technology.
No, absolutely, it's a proven technology. I had an airplane many years back called a RANS 9, and the only way we could do aerobatics in it, because you couldn't wear a parachute in it, it was just too small an airplane to even wear a conformal parachute on it. It had a ballistic parachute system behind my head.
Yeah, and we've had this entire century with the Cirrus family of aircraft with whole airframe parachutes, and they've revolutionized the safety of piston single GA aircraft. So we designed that in from the beginning. And with the military aircraft, which just for a little eye candy in the background, if we can put up one of the beast mode shots, this aircraft does feature whole airframe parachute. And it sits forward of the wing. So there it is in Marine Corps livery, launching rockets from its rocket pods under its wings on the side there. Those are removable so that you can mount them to fit external stores on them. But
so Peter, keep this picture up, please. For the folks that are going to write into me, go, well, come on, Cobra, that's going to slow the plane down if you have those wings on it. Well, that's the same thing that happens on an F-35B when you put the gun pods on it. Yep. You guys have looked at putting your internal bays like we have on the F-22.
Yeah.
And
so Amanda, go to the other beast mode shot. There's another one, but that's exactly the question. Yes, it'll go slower. You know what? The F-35 program is often almost scuppered because they started out internal stores only.
Right.
And they were almost done, and the Air Force was like, yes, it has beast in the name. There's two beast pictures. So the Air Force changed their mind. Like, no, actually, we want external stores. And they had to redesign the aircraft. So that's one of the mistakes we decided we weren't going to make. We designed it, sure, if you want to go over 400 knots, you're not putting external stores on it.
Right.
You're not pushing rocket
Unless
pods.
maybe it's a conformal fuel tank, and you're still going to pay for that. You're going to pay some penalty on that. But you can make a conformal fuel tank that would probably keep you in the high 300s.
Oh, no, that's true. That's true. But there are a lot of interesting things about the tilt wing when you push it into high speed, as we have, that confront a bunch of unspoken assumptions that VTOL people have that they inherited from helicopters.
Right. Exactly.
So one of them is that the hover is the most demanding phase of flight, and that it's easier to go faster. So you design your aircraft with power to hover. That's not true if you want to go over 400 knots. And if you want to go over 400 knots, you have to have enough power to push the aircraft that fast.
Right.
Drag goes up exponentially with speed. So the cool thing is in the hover, our aircraft's loafing. It uses less than a third of its installed power to hover, even at max gross. Well, now a lot of things become unlocked.
Right.
In particular, let's show the air show picture, just to give people some context for the other VTOL aircraft in the fleet right now. What we realized was we could take our civil aircraft and make it weigh a bunch more by adding structure to make it stronger. And then it could start doing everything that those MH-60s that the Navy operates can do. It can do sling loads and vertical repositioning and boring, slow hover flight all day long. It's not even challenged to do that. And it'll be able to pull +8, -4 Gs like an A4, right? And be an attack aircraft in airplane mode. And it'll go fast in between. So there it is in the middle. So you've got the 22 Osprey on the left. You've got our MV-5K1. Then you've got the F-35, and then you got the CH-53. So we're looking forward to actually making this a reality for the Marine Corps so that they'll have this capability to replace. So I was talking about replacing the Navy's MH-60s, but we also want to replace the Marine Corps' H-1 family. All of those helicopters they're long in the tooth. They've been great aircraft, but
phenomenally good.
The world has changed, right? We can now build drones for tens of thousands of dollars that can take out a helicopter. They have the speed, they have the guidance autonomously. You do not want to be flying around a battlefield at 100 miles an hour or less, even 150. The Marines I talk to, they won't ingress in an Osprey below 250 knots. Right? Helicopters can't do that. So with our aircraft, you can come in at 400 knots. In the sim I've shown, we can go from 400 knots at treetop level to landing in a clearing in 45 seconds.
So you bring a really important part up. Unfortunately, a lot of the generation of the Marines that you're working with are not able to draw upon the CH-46 experience. That is the Sikorsky, the Piasecki-inspired design of tandem main rotors, where you had them, you don't have a tail rotor on that. But you could rapidly slow those aircraft down because you're able to flex the two rotor heads opposite direction, and it would come to a stop. And I know this from perfect experience because I could usually outrun them and a 47 in the 53 days. But if I was coming up behind one of them and they knew that and he really wanted to do it, it was that Maverick line. We're going to throw the gear and the flaps out, and he's going to fly right by us. And I flew right by them, and they absolutely snookered me. Because I had so much smash and so much. I was not going to slow down that H-53 in what they did without destroying it. Now I could take a full negative G. It wasn't recommended on the H-53 that I flew rotor head. You could take it down to a -0.5 and not have any issues whatsoever. Right. But you were using up valuable material science kind of stuff on gears, rotors, bearings, all those kinds of pieces that were in there. So it wasn't something recommended, but you knew that it would never depart. When I flew
Yeah.
Russian airplanes, you didn't even want to think about going anything negative because of that, because
Yeah.
it would depart the aircraft. It wasn't that they were badly built aircraft. There was just a limitation that you had to respect.
Yeah, they
on that.
didn't have the material science to be able to do that with their drivetrains.
And they didn't care because they were going to build in numbers that if you lost 100, you still had 900 behind them coming. They didn't worry about those kinds of things. That we didn't have that kind of same kind of planning requirement, let alone any kind of personnel recovery kind of thing that was going on. You don't want to lose people that way.
What was Khrushchev's quote? Quantity has a quality all its own.
That's correct. And
So
they
truth
lived
to
that. They lived that to a great extent. I mean, I have a lot of respect for a lot of the gear they have. I enjoyed flying the airplanes that they built, the few that I've had the opportunity to fly, but it wasn't something. It didn't come from a Western or definitely not an American approach to it.
Yeah.
The point that I'm making is you took the Civil Bird, and there's a lot of precedent out there for taking civilian frames and technology and turning them into military, but you didn't simply just strap stuff onto the military. You guys looked at making a military fuselage, a military design out of the core aircraft that was there. So the
Yes.
basis is very, very strong and solid. The engineering is not in question. And now you've added it on, and generally when you do that, the penalties become so high that it's not even worth doing. Well, you were able to come up with ways to take advantage of those increases to go forward on there. I'm talking too much. Grab some of your pictures and let's talk some of your pictures because I don't want to talk too much.
Yeah,
But I'm
we wanted
when
to
it comes to this stuff.
show the picture of, we made this a true multi-use aircraft, not just dual-use civil military. And getting back to your point, Cobra, fortunate that my VP of engineering was co-inventor of the Predator, the original Predator drone. And then he stayed on at General Atomics and delivered another 9 variants of the Predator down through the Reaper. And we want to pull up the file that starts with 181 Alpha, Marines on the Beach. So this is a good one to show the multi-use capability of this aircraft. So anyway, our VP of engineering came in and the aircraft behind you, Cobra, is a single engine. That was the first one we modeled. And as we looked at FAA regulations, and we looked at the number of seats we could put on it, we actually realized that going to a twin made sense. So our VP of engineering came in, we brought him on board, and he helped us spearhead the redesigning to a twin. And that's what allowed us to make something that can replace a Seahawk or a Black Hawk. So we're just trying to coordinate on the photo here. So it's 181A under V-421 under W under Marines on Beach. There we go. So this is the resulting twin craft design. And that forward nose section on this variant is designed to flip up like cargo aircraft do. And we sized it so you can get a whole M-Razor in there, roll it in, roll it off. And the entire cockpit is tilting up with the nose in this case. So this variant is crewed. We can make uncrewed variants. The Air Force paid us to develop autonomous software. So you could fly cargo in without even having pilots in there. So it just gives you a sense of the versatility that we're trying to offer to our military customers.
So when you look at something like that, and I'll let everyone know you don't have to write the emails in, but you don't have to know the pilots would not be in the cockpit when you flip it up. So we'll just take that off the table unless they misbehaved. I guess they could.
Although I will say they did do that at Normandy with the glider pilots.
Yep, you sure did.
They did. They stayed in those as they flipped the nose up. So
yep, they flipped those. They stayed there, and then their reward was they got to grab their rifle and join the party. The rest of their airborne infantry that they went in. I actually got to meet one of the last glider pilots before he retired when I was in flight school. He's a young guy he entered into that, and he just didn't make the transition to helicopters. So he stayed in the airborne infantry, but he still had the glider wings on. Pretty incredible And again, that's a really, that's a very interesting point to bring up because that is another key point. Why did we do that? We did that because we needed to bring large amounts of troops and combat gear to specific points, and dragging them behind powered airplanes was an efficient way because we did not
Yeah.
have a helicopter and you could move a lot of mass. Now we were still, and we had other parts and pieces to that, but there is a genesis there that is seen in what we're trying to do with the aircraft. So
Well, this tension always going back and forth, right? The military has multiple missions. To do their job, they have to have logistics. They've got to have supplies, beams, bullets, equipment, gear. But then you actually need to attack things and defend against things that are attacking you. So,
and sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And when we get into the Pacific, I was going to say the specific. I was going back to when I was 3 years old and trying to say the Pacific Ocean. When we get to that kind of ranging activity, you need the versatility of going fast, going a long distance, and not being tied to a runway. It's just that simple.
Yeah, and the high-speed VTOL challenge was about being able to cope with the challenges of operating and fighting in the Pacific theater, which is an unfortunate prospect that has been mooted about over the past.
Well, if we don't prepare for it, it's going to come into fruition. It's when you prepare for stuff. It's like when I get ready to prevent something. My age-old thing is if I don't pre-flight and have the snowblower ready to go, we're going to get early snow. And if I decide that I'm going to put it away at the end of February, March, because we have that warm spray, we're going to get whopped, with a couple feet of it because I decided that, it was better to put it away early for some reason. No, that's just the way it is. When you're not prepared, that's when, the fickle finger of fate is going to point right at you and nail you right between the eyes.
Well, the Romans said, "Si desiderat pacem, preparat bellum." So this is the other beast mode shot, which, as you can see, is firing the same rockets, but through a port in the fuselage that can open and close. So this would be internal stores of those standard 2.75-inch rockets, but keep the aircraft clean so you can go fast and still launch them.
A critical avenue on there. One of the things that, and again, we'll keep working through your pictures, but one of the things I really want to stress, your team looks at every angle, and we'll fess it up. And I think I've said this to you, and I've said it to others in the past. I will take a B+ aircraft in every category, as opposed to one that is A+ in 2 or 3 out of 10 things that I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do that every day of the week. It's sort of like what I used to say about my beloved Coast Guard. We really needed a helicopter that was more of a pickup truck, not a sports car. I needed something that was going to go fairly fast, but could also carry a load. And then when things changed, you don't want me to do rescue today. You want me to move oil booms and teams of people, but I have the same aircraft. So now what was optimized for one mission is now not able to do another mission well. Going back to the civil argument, we have great airports. We have although not a great national airspace system, I think the FAA does a great job, but it would be great if we could get them up to a more modern computerized system that we can take advantage. We have great navigation capabilities, but we're still cramming people into hubbed airports, and it's not easy to make anything else work. Where, although we still have large urban areas, you can't even effectively work around a large urban area easily with direct point-to-point capability.
No, you can't.
The ability to go between Boston and New York. Well, why, in the age that we live in, the way we're doing this show, why do you have to have meetings? Sometimes you have to have meetings. Sometimes you need to physically move bodies and body parts and plasma and whatever, fill in the blank, that has to be moved. And if you can't do it efficiently, you're losing, and you're going to lose lives.
Yeah, transportation is the circulatory system, of the economy. And if it gets clogged the way it is now, it's like arteriosclerosis. It's holding us all back. And between Boston and Washington, D.C., we have a megacity region that by itself is the 5th largest economy in the world.
Correct.
And we can't move people efficiently through it because it's too congested. It's too built up.
And we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable, and it doesn't even have to be an enemy attack. Every time we have a major weather event, and people say, well, and I'm not going to go down the road about climate change. We can have that talk some other night. I'm glad to have that talk. I'm glad to talk about that. I'm just saying, why does the weather, for whatever reason, just the weather alone, impact us so much more severely? Because we're at max capacity of every surface operation that we do. We're extremely vulnerable the way we fly airplanes, that if you have a major weather capability, you cannot take advantage of what I did as part of my career. When the fixed wing folks didn't want to fly, couldn't fly, or it didn't make sense for them to fly, we would go out and putz around in that helicopter because we could fly under weather, we could fly in areas that would allow us to exploit it. And although it wasn't as efficient, it was the only game in town. So now you're optimizing an aircraft that's going to exploit those capabilities. It's going to allow it to happen. And we need that. Don't even get me started about the vulnerabilities.
Go back to the B+, A+ thing.
Sure.
So I will tell you that our aircraft is a solid A in everything it does. Maybe not A+ in everything.
Right.
It's definitely better than B+, right? The reason for that is, again, this corner of the performance trade-off we had to crawl into to go 400 knots. When you have all that extra power installed, it enables you to do a lot of things very well. Like that aircraft can comfortably hover at max gross weight till it runs out of fuel. It's designed to do that. Most helicopters can't do that because they overheat their transmissions.
Right.
It will hover at max gross at 6,000 feet and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. 6K 95 is the jargon. All our current helicopters are limited to 4K 95. Why did it end up at 6K 95? Well, because the civil aircraft to operate out of Denver on a hot day. Denver's at 5,000 feet, 120 degree day. Which is we're starting to see now. That's what we plan for.
Right.
So all that extra power is a select great capability. Another one is you're most vulnerable vertical takeoff landing aircraft, helicopter or VTOL, when you're low and slow. Well, when we're low and slow, we have huge amounts of excess power. We can put that into, quote, inexhaustible countermeasures. You have jamming of various kinds, now laser point defense weapons. These are becoming a real thing. We've got megawatts of power we can put into point defense lasers. So I'm giddy about how cool it is. We studied the V-22 program. V-22 was cursed by the fact that it was going to be very expensive. So they went to all the forces and tried to make it a joint program. And of course, what they got was conflicting requirements from the different forces. So they designed a compromise aircraft. And to your point, when you design a compromise, it's not great at anything. Now, that said, it turned out to be critical to the Marine Corps for their mission. It's so much better for helicopters for what the Marines need to do that it's revolutionized how they operate. When they had the grounding and they had to start going back to CH-53s and 47s, it was rough.
Right.
And they actually, to their credit, as the Marines always do, improvise, adapt, overcome. They started using CH-53s for combat missions, not just resupply and logistics. It's awesome. I love the Marines. But they really wanted their fast aircraft back.
Sure.
So you had asked why didn't we just get a huge amount of money? And I started talking about battery VTOLs getting a bunch of money out of a green boom, which is true. The other thing is that anybody developing a new aircraft takes a long time and a lot of money.
It shouldn't. It just shouldn't.
It shouldn't, but there's.
It does. That's the reality of how we do this system.
Yeah. So we have been doing our best to offer an awesome alternative to the Marine Corps and the Navy, and I think we're getting some notice. So I believe that there may be some government support coming our way that'll let us then show off to the civil world, look what's going to be possible. So that's really our path forward.
So and that's not an uncommon history in this,
It's not. Yeah.
But I like the fact of how this is rooted. There's an economic civil problem that this aircraft shows promise for. And then we see the promise of how it adapts, and then how you guys adapted the airframe on this. Now, we don't have them sitting out on the ramp to go out there and look at. We have, scale models and out there, and I'm going to let you run your pictures. But one last thing I want you to make sure that we don't miss this. So, where are the engines on this aircraft? How is this aircraft doing this? Explain to everyone how it works.
So we put the engines in the center of the hull, behind the wing, on the top. There are lots of reasons for that, engineering reasons, but you actually mentioned it. B-22 engines are out at the end of its wings. Those engines are heavy and they're complicated, and they have to have fuel sent to them. So that design decision added not just complexity, but also a lot of weight, right? Because that wing it's a suspension bridge. It's got to hold up all that weight, react to all those loads as it's maneuvering. So we're like, nah. And then they were tilting the engines, at least with the new V75. They're not tilting the engines anymore. But they still have that problem you mentioned with the X-49 of download, where you're blowing down on your own wing. Right. So we were like, nope, we're not doing any of that. So the engines are in the hull, centralized. The what's out in the wing is a propeller hub and a gearbox to drive the propeller hub. And
which that is also a really common practice to turboprops.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are airplanes that fly all over the. That's not a real breakaway technology. You're just applying a really refined technology.
Yeah. So we that gives us a lot of flexibility as well. We started out with using mechanical drive shafts to transmit the power out to the propellers. We can still do that, but the state of the art of electric aviation is advancing. Right. There's a company in Albany, New York, Wright Electric, and the Wright brothers. We have a 2.5 megawatt electric motor. Right. If we put one of those on each side of our aircraft, turning our propeller, that's all we need. So now we can use electrical cables, instead of mechanical drive shafts. And that's exciting because that really starts to unlock, the electrical power use for the inexhaustible countermeasures I was talking about. So an integrated hybrid electric variant is now competitive. It didn't used to be. State of the art is advanced so that electric is now competitive from a weight and performance perspective. Even a few years ago, I would have said, nope, we're going to stick with mechanical drivetrains because it's a lot lighter. It's kind of not true anymore.
Right.
So we could do that. And there's other cool tricks we've played with making the aircraft easy for the joint forces to have their own requirements
met. Right.
And I'm going to keep it quiet. Some of this is proprietary.
Sure.
But if somebody wants a custom version, they can have a custom version very easily that doesn't require redesigning the rest of the aircraft. Right? It'll be like changing the radios, or not even as complicated as changing the radios.
So one of the things I really love about what you just said from the operator perspective that I still, I hold on to my youth. I like to convince myself that I'm still in that game, even though I will admit that I'm getting long in tooth. But when you're not running, you have the ability to protect your electrical components very, very well. We do this. That's pretty much a big part of what we do. You have less physical places for a round to hit on that aircraft that's going to cause that. You can encase your engines, you can build in ballistic protections for that. You can run series of wires that you have backup systems, like we used to have multiple hydraulic systems just for that. So if you took rounds through lines, you're doing that now with electrical wires. Much less flammable if hit. Backups do not cost you the same in weight penalties on capabilities. And one key part, you still have pilots in this loop, even though you do have the autonomous capability to go there. I won't upset my dinner by thinking about that as the future, but it is a practical part of it. But you also have the software that's going to allow you to have in emergency modes, in combat reactive modes, be able to take advantage of what you still have intact on the airplane.
Yes.
And you have the pilot in the loop. and this goes back to the NASA days. There were people in NASA when they were developing the lander that they had to keep the pilot in the loop. They had the ability to do an autonomous. And I remind the kids, we went to the moon with 8-track players and 16 bits capability, and we went to the moon. Not a number of times. Okay, we did that. Yes, there would be folks on other shows that I've done that will tell you that was all a big conspiracy. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to go with that. We went to the moon and what the technology that we did. But one of the aspects was they had the pilot in the loop working with the technology they had so that when they bumped into something like a boulder that they did not see, they were able to fly that. They were on like something like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes worth of fuel when they were letting down. That's it.
Well, and they'd done a huge amount of training. They had trained that exact scenario.
And they built aircraft
in an aircraft
flying in our atmosphere that would mimic what they were going to do on the moon with no atmosphere.
Yes, I love that.
I love that too. And that's what I see. But that's what I see in TAC. That kind of approach is what I see in TAC.
Well, I want to show another cool thing about tilt wings that nobody else in the world knows, right? This is a thing I figured out, and so I'm taking credit. I can take full credit for almost nothing in this program, but this is a thing. So, Amanda, if you can play the tail rotor versus tail fan failures movie.
Oh.
So on the left, you have a helicopter with a tail rotor failure. And I will tell you that the pilot walked away from this. On the right, you have our aircraft with a tail fan failure.
Play that one more time, please.
Yeah. So the way helicopters use the tail rotor to maintain yaw control, so to keep it pointed where you want it to go. And when it fails, the torque from the main rotor control the aircraft around, you lose control and you crash. Our aircraft has tail fans between the vertical stabilizers that give you pitch control. And you would think, oh, well, what happens if you lose your tail fans, right? Do you lose pitch control? Do you nose down and dive into the ground? And well, what I figured out was that we can use small amplitude movements of the wing to actually maintain pitch control even when we lose the tail fans. So Amanda, if you will play tail fan out landing test, we can watch this in great detail. This is done in the sim manually. So this is without automation. With the software controlling it, it would be even smoother.
Okay, so a quick couple pieces I want to put in there. For all my Hilo Bubbas, they're going to say, well, you showed that thing, it was spin around, you can do an auto rotation. And everybody knows, yes, you lose your tail rotor, you can do an auto. If you're in a hover and you have altitude, if you catch it quick enough and you have some forward motion, you can sometimes get enough directional control by going down the fuselage that you get it and you're able to affect it, but you still have the same kind of problem that you're dealing with. If you're in a larger helicopter, like was shown there, and the type that I flew for part of my career, that didn't happen very easily. you still had residual movement and you had nothing to counter with it. So you were looking for putting it down and doing the auto rotation with that. And then once you make that decision that you're going to auto rotate and you cut the power, gravity is now your friend and your enemy at the same time going forward. Taking nothing away from the skills there, the important piece that I want people to understand is you're controlling this all the way back down to the deck by using what's left. This is the same kind of concept with the A-10 losing an engine, a wing, and a tail, and you're still able to control it mainly through a hydromechanical system that they have, but it was built into the design of the airplane. The F-15 that traded, and I think it was F-16 or that hit, or the battle damaged Israeli Air Force One, where they came back and most of the wing is missing. That was a software issue, that was working with that they were able to keep control of the aircraft and get it back down on the ground. Never flew again, but they were able to recover that airplane and get it out of battle. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing here, which is very uncommon in a VTOL airplane. That's the important thing that I was trying to drive all that remark to, that you have this kind of control. And then ultimately, we talked about earlier in the show, you guys have put a ballistic parachute system into corporation, that if it really was all coming apart, you still have that. And depending on the configuration, this aircraft could handle, with the penalty of putting them in there, you could put ejection seats in this airplane if you were in a pilot-only mode. So.
Yep, all true. And we've kept that optionality, right? So it'll be up to the customer how they want to equip it.
And each airplane is going to have a different risk. Each mission role is going to have a different way you're going to configure that on there to make that happen. Yeah. All right, we're at the end of our time for this installment, Peter. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. Obviously, my geekness is just flowing on this particular show. But
we have time for one last
absolutely
video.
For you, anything.
Thank you. We've been talking about Transcend Air, and I am in fact the CEO of Transcend Air. But Transcend Air recently has spun out a wholly owned subsidiary called IronAxe. And I just wanted to explain, at least for the greatest audience in the world's benefit, why my title says CEO IronAxe. And this is a new thing we're doing. We're taking this tilt wing virtue and we're applying it to helping make us here in this new world of drones that we live in safer. And so we're focusing on what's called counter unmanned aerial systems, counter UAS, which basically means keeping naughty drones from harming people. And what I want to show is the video. It's the one entitled IronAxe Moirai, a new era in counter UAS. We're targeting this for police use cases. It also works for the military for base, port, facility defense. But this is a smarter, simpler, cheaper, safer way of bringing down drones that are where you don't want them, to keep people safe. So
and the buy point on that, Peter, is what? I mean, is this another $1 million system to produce these?
No, we'll sell the aircraft for about $10,000 a piece, and they're reusable. Reusable.
That seems very reasonable.
Well, they are. It is very reasonable. The closest competitor costs $150,000 right now.
So that means you could get 15 of yours for that same investment.
15 of ours for one of those.
With the big brain on Cobra. Big brain. Play that video. I'm going to stop talking.
Go ahead.
tremendous. And the fact that I love about that is you can cycle that thing as many times as you have to.
Exactly.
And that is one of the things about the system being overwhelmed. We just went through an exercise at the base that I'm at. And one of the parts was, you had the drones, the drone attack. And what's one of the techniques? Well, the drones go up to the building and they look in the windows. The operator looks in the windows and sees, we see this out of the Ukraine all the time, sees what the target they want. It may be an individual. It may be something that they're trying to get to the control hub to take out the power of a base, the computer network of a base by hitting, parts of the building. This comes and then goes back and picks up its next fouling net and out and goes forward on that.
Well, and we have concepts for putting multiple nets on. You'll see we reuse the parachute concept to keep the thing falling from the sky now descending safely under the parachute. And then we also have swarm strips and now swarm seeds based on maple seeds that make clouds of chaff-like stuff that tangles up the propellers. And all of the, those effectors, that's the jargon, the things that have the effect of downing the drone. Those are so cheap, I don't even know what they cost, right? They're made out of paper, literally out of paper and string. So you got a $10,000 aircraft that can fly multiple sorties using extremely cheap reusable effectors. So we're very excited about it. And again, it comes down to the tilt wing's efficiency.
Right. And that's the point I wanted to make. If you look at that scale of that demonstrator that was flying, the drone, the counter drone system that was flying, Iron X, you're looking at that. That's demonstrating what's going to happen on scale when it gets bigger. And it came from the bigger engineering, not the other way around. So there's not going to be an unpleasant surprise when we go to scale it up and go, well, this didn't happen. It's just the opposite. You started from the big aircraft and say, okay, we're going to adapt this technology and make it work in this breakout area that we're concerned about. And as you said, police departments, fire departments. I mean, that capability in a riptide could take out a flotation device to somebody who's caught in a riptide. Yes. You could have a lifeguard that's moving that out there. And why is that a capability? Because it's a capability because it doesn't cost $100,000. Yeah. It costs a tenth of that to get that ability to go out and do that.
Yeah.
So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this show. Peter, it has been an absolute pleasure to, I can't wait till we do our next installment on this. We didn't get to half the stuff that we could have talked about, so we'll have to pick it up on the next one. And of course, we're going to have to tease the anti-gravity business a little bit more. You're one of the most capable people I know. You are an absolute prime example of everything that I love about folks that really believe in what they're doing, have a good heart, and really put it all on the line to go do that. And I thank you so much for taking the time to talk to the greatest audience on the planet, share with us on this. And I hope a whole bunch of people really take the time to go to Transcend Air, take a look at the website, get involved, get excited about some of the stuff that's on there, and ask those questions. Why are we not spending the time and money on this right now? And we're pretty close. And I think we're going to have a major breakthrough very, very soon for you guys. Well earned.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, folks, this is it for our show tonight. Thank you so much for your diligent support, and I look forward to the next time we're together. And please send some comments about Peter and Transcend Air Corporation. This is a breakaway and a breakthrough, a revolutionary leap that anybody here in this show tonight may be able to see the benefits of very, very soon. This is not 10 years down the road. This is about 10 minutes down the road. Thank you. Good night.